Continuing debate to the honourable member for Chatham, Kent Leamington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honour and pleasure to bring the voices for Chatham, Kent Leamington to this chamber today to address Budget 2024. Common definition of insanity, Mr. Speaker, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, this budget is again a tax more and spend even more budget. This government's ninth, or actually more correctly, the eighth, since they didn't bother coming to this chamber in the pandemic and just kept spending. I don't personally claim to be a financial expert, but I have run and been part of businesses. I have borrowed funds, and I have been expected to pay them back. I've also had the privilege to be involved with and chair several organizations, and so have had the experience of being accountable to others for their money and stewarding organizations to their collective goal. Responsible stewardship of one's own funds, but even more importantly of others' funds, leads to growth and prosperity of one's business, one's organization, or, as we're discussing today, of one's country. But please don't take my word for it on this budget that it's evidence of insanity. Let's look at what others say. Across the country, many people are sounding the alarm bells over this budget. Aaron Woodrick and John Hartley from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute state that the growth expectations, projections for Canada are anemic, their word. 1.2% for Canada versus 2.7% for the U.S., largely driven by declines in the level of business investment. The OECD supports the severe prognosis as it projects Canada will have the lowest real per capita GDP growth among advanced economies between now and 2060. Yes, 2060. Our very own Parliamentary Budget Office has projected that economic growth will remain, quote, sluggish through 2024 due to restrictive monetary policy resulting from rising budgetary deficits. Furthermore, Yves Giroux, the Public Budget Officer, states that the math simply doesn't add up on the expectation that the federal public service will shrink due to natural attrition by 5,000 FTEs over 4 years. He says that these Liberals have made too many promises, pledged too many things, made too many announcements for that to even have a shred of credibility. He says that we can expect the public service to grow, not shrink. Here's another perspective. The former Liberal Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge has warned that he believes that this budget will be the worst since 1982, and I won't say who was in this chamber then. Canada will not reach par growth with other developed countries until 2060. Why? Because this government's out-of-control spending has created an economic black hole that we won't be able to dig out of for 36 years, according to others' words. Again, don't take my word for it. Let's move more to a more recent Bank of Canada representative statement. Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, has noted in a recent speech in Halifax that, quote, "You've seen those signs that say, in case of emergency, break glass." Well, it's time to break glass, end quote. She cited lagging Canadian productivity rates as one of the contributing factors. She went on to say that one of Canada's main issues dragging down our productivity rates is the lack of business investment. While business investment has declined in Canada since 2014, in other countries, including the U.S., it's continued to grow. As a result of Canada's GDP per hour worked, a key measure of productivity growth is among the lowest in the OECD. And this budget will only continue this trend as it does not incent business investment. Another Bank of Canada guy, Tiff Macklem, our present governor, agrees and states that this budget has not significantly changed the government's fiscal path and is unlikely to affect government's macroeconomic trajectory in the near term. Mr. Speaker, why all this discussion about economic and growth? Why is it important? Should we not just focus on helping people? Mr. Speaker, economic growth is what allows a government to responsibly and sustainably deliver social programming. Irresponsible fiscal management is exactly what jeopardizes a government's ability to maintain a strong social safety net and create the fiscal conditions for Canadians to thrive, mainly low, predictable inflation, and lower interest rates. Even oft-touted Liberal leader Mark County, future Liberal leader I guess I should say, stated that there's not enough focus on economic growth in this budget. Former Liberal Finance Minister Bill Morneau, in his book related to the Prime Minister, would routinely announce numbers, bigger numbers for more spending because, well, bigger numbers sound good. I agree that bigger numbers sound good when they're in your bank account, but not so much when they add to the public debt. Another former Liberal Finance Minister, John Manley, said, while the Bank of Canada was trying to press on the brakes of inflation with higher interest rates, this Prime Minister was pressing on the inflationary gas pedal with his spending that ballooned interest rates in the first place. This Prime Minister seems hell-bent on destroying the economic fabric of this nation for his own political gain, with no regard for future generations that he is fiscally handcuffing. He refuses to listen to reason, and here's my main point of my speech. He refuses to listen even from his fellow Liberals. This Prime Minister has added more debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined. It now stands, Mr. Speaker, at $1.255 trillion, and there is no plan to bring balance or to control inflationary deficits. Doug Porter, chief economist with the Bank of Montreal, put it best when he said, in describing the value of growth, when he cautioned that higher government spending is perhaps not where you want to see that growth. Yet, what does Budget 2024 do? It includes $40 billion in new spending, which will continue to drive up the cost of goods we buy and the interest rates we pay. This year, the Prime Minister and his Liberal government are forcing Canadians to spend $54 billion just to service the Prime Minister's debt. That's the same amount that the GST brings in government revenues. And sometimes when we talk about millions and billions in debt and deficits, it's hard to comprehend for us what that means in our everyday lives. Well, let's think about it this way. The GST has now become the DST. Instead of the GST raising funds for social programming, every single cent of it now goes to service the Prime Minister's debt. The goods and services tax has become the debt servicing tax. It is these very deficits and debts that have contributed to higher inflation and the resulting higher interest rates necessary to try and tamp down inflation. Again, according to Scotiabank, the Bank of Canada would have only had to raise interest rates to 3% if government spending hadn't stoked inflation, meaning that rates are a full 2% higher than they need to be. Again, why is this important? This Liberal government's mismanagement has directly affected Canadians' lives. Housing costs have doubled, mortgages and rents. The Financial Post reports that 3.4 million Canadians will renew their mortgages by 2025, and a total of $900 billion of mortgages need to be renewed in the next 3 years. More and more Canadians are going to have to sacrifice the basic necessity like food or clothing to afford their rent or mortgage payments. In 2015, these Liberals were elected on the promise of small and temporary deficits, less than $10 billion per year. They were elected with the promise of stable inflation and the promise of low interest rates forever. So anyways, you remember? Well, after 9 long years, it's clear that this Prime Minister is definitely not worth the cost, and this budget does nothing to solve the problems that Canadians face. But despite all the negativity that I've referenced in this speech, largely voiced by Liberals and independent officials, I do have hope, Mr. Speaker. I have hope in Canadians, because we've come back from disasters like this before, and we can do it again. After World War II, many families had suffered personal loss. Many soldiers either didn't come home or came home wounded. But many came home after rescuing democracy and set to rescuing our economy that was heavily indebted after the war effort. Record government surpluses that followed the war addressed the debt, and a long period of economic prosperity followed. Mr. Speaker, today there is also hope on the horizon. A Conservative government will axe the tax on farmers and food by immediately passing C-234 in its original form. We will build the homes, not more bureaucracy. We will also cap spending with a dollar-for-dollar rule to bring down interest rates and inflation. Under a Conservative government, my children and grandchildren will know that if they work hard, home ownership will be a reality. Their home, your home, our home. Let's bring it home, Mr. Speaker.